Welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio, the official podcast of APSATS, the Association of Partners of Sex Addict Trauma Specialists, hosted by Dr. Jake Porter. APSATS is a nonprofit organization providing professional training and compassionate support to partners affected by problematic sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. In each episode, Dr. Jake guides a conversation of enlightening insights and practical tools to empower those affected by sex addiction and betrayal trauma to use their voices and live their values. The mission of Betrayal Recovery Radio is to offer hope to those in need of healing and growth to those moving through grief. And now, here's your host, Dr. Jake Porter.
Welcome to another episode of APSATS podcast, Betrayal Recovery Radio. I am your host, Dr. Jake Porter. I am glad that you are here. And hey, we have a great, helpful, powerful episode for you this week. Today, joining me is an APSATS-trained clinician, Carley Pool, who is actually on staff with me in my practice, Daring Ventures. Carley is from South Africa. She has her BA in psychology from the University of Johannesburg, an honors in clinical psychology from Rhodes University, and a Master of Arts in counseling from Houston Graduate School of Theology. Like I said, she is trained in the multidimensional partner trauma model with APSAT. She's a CSAT candidate. She's trained in Gottman couples therapy, emotionally focused therapy for couples. She does incredible work with couples and betrayed partners. And the subject of our show today is on children of sex addicts and betrayed partners. And we're going to talk mostly about younger children and teen children, and a little bit we will touch on adult children. I had hoped to cover that content as well, but there was so much that we had to talk about that we'll just have to make that its whole episode soon. What do you do with the kids? How do you help the kids? What's too much to say? What's not enough to say? When do you say it? How do you do it as a team? What if your partner won't work with you? There's a lot of really heavy, important questions that come up on this subject. What do we do with the kids? And so we hope that this conversation today is going to give you some ideas, some guides, some principles for moving through this space, right? For moving through this space, this murky middle place with kids who know something's going on but may not know everything. So we really hope that this is a powerful and important and helpful episode to you. Before we jump into that, though, I do just want to let you know about some things that are coming up. First of all, APSATS has a training coming up for coaches and clinicians who work with couples or want to work with couples. Carol Jurgensen-Sheets, Carol the coach, and her ERCM, Early Recovery Couples Empathy Model, are going to be taught by Carol. And that is coming up pretty soon with APSATS. I want to say in about a month or so, and you can find out about that at APSATS.org. There's several other trainings that you, I'm sure, want to know about. The multidimensional partner trauma training, which is the cornerstone training of the organization APSATS. So you'll check that out. I did just pull it up because I had gone a little bit blank. So the ERCM training is going to be September 6th through the 9th. So that's coming up real soon, just a couple of weeks away. And then the next offering of the multidimensional partner trauma model training is going to be November 8th through November 11th. So that also is for any clinicians or coaches who are wanting to learn to work with betrayed partners. The last thing I want to tell you about is a completely free online event that I'm offering called the Couples Boundaries Summit. And you can sign up to get your free pass right now at Boundaries Summit. That's plural of boundaries, BOUNDARIES Summit, SUMMIT.com. Go to boundariessummit.com and you'll see that I'm going to be joined with 5 top experts in this field, all talking about boundaries, both for yourself individually, for your relationship, your primary relationship, for any relationship. And so that's coming up. The summit itself will actually be on September the 17th online. But you want to go ahead and claim your free ticket now at boundariesummit.com. All right. I don't want to hold off anymore. I want to jump right in so you can hear this incredible discussion that I had with Carley Pool. Hello, Carley. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, Jay.
Thank you for joining us on Betrayal Recovery Radio. And thank you for suggesting this really important topic on the children of sex addicts. Yeah. So, I'm just going to start with something really broad here, which is that there are folks out there who might say that, hey, this is something going on between the parents. This is something going on and they can handle it behind closed doors and, just take care of that in the bedroom or whatever. And their kids will be fine and won't know the difference. So do you really think that children are directly affected, even if they don't know directly about sexual addiction in the home?
Oh, Jake, of course, children are affected directly. I think, especially children, more than adults, because they're intuitive little beings and they feed off of relationship cues. And so when mom and dad change, what happens? If mom and dad's way of relating and acting to one another and to them changes, they know.
Yeah.
And if we think about just small changes that affect them, like things like even, what do you call it when the hours go back and forth in the year?
Oh, right. Daylight savings.
And daylight savings. Yes. Yeah. So like their whole physiology is affected by small shifts. And so they're part of a big system. And one change in the system affects them in multi ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
yes,
I'm thinking, yeah. And I'm thinking as I listen to you, I'm thinking about what I know about children and childhood development and where they are and how children are so egocentric, not in the way that we think of adults when we use that word, right? But that children tend to believe that they are the cause of things. Can you talk a little bit about how that might play into this dynamic also?
Yeah, of course. I think that speaks to the internalizing narrative, that internalizing script, because that little part of the brain is what's developed first, is the self. So that inside self is developed by me and only me, and that's shaped by the relationships around us. And so when the relationships around us change, then that's my fault. That's something I did, because the external control is not there yet. It's all the internal locus of control. There's no shifting hasn't happened between it's me and it's because kids think they have that power.
Right.
They control the world.
Right.
They throw its way down and here comes mom running.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. Thank you. That's so well said. So, so should parents then just tell their children, just put it all out there on the table? What do you think?
Well, I think the question that I've asked some of my clients who are parents is, how do you talk about sex? How did you talk about sex even before this happened? Like, what is the understanding of sex in the family? Is it taboo? Like, do they have to find out from kids at school? Depending on the age range. I think it even boils down to, like, the way we describe things, like in the house. How do we talk about genitalia? How do we talk about just sex in general, in intimate relationships, and how do you talk to your child about sex or not talk to your child about sex from when they're like 2-3 years
Right.
old, and sexual things and sexual nature.
Right.
And so when we ask, do you just tell the children, or what is the context? What are you going to tell them? How are you going to tell them? Because if sex is if there's no understanding or together created understanding of sex, then there's this dysfunction in the sexual intimacy, and you put that on top of the non-existing understanding, or the blinded kind of like guessing definition of sex, and then you add the sexual dysfunction on top of that. That I can only imagine is extremely confusing to a child.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, yeah, as I just sit here and listen to you, my head kind of starts spinning, thinking about a kid. And I'll tell you where my mind goes to, and I'm thinking about like when I get to teach human growth and development at the grad school, and how sort of that Piagetian idea and that Vygotskian idea, those are some developmental psychologists out there, of how we scaffold our knowledge, right? Like, I can't go from A to Z. I have to go from A to B. And then once I know B, then I can know C. And there's this scaffolding of knowledge. And so I hear what you're saying. Like, we have to consider how much scaffolding has been built there for that child before we go try to dump this new information on them about what's going on in the home. And sadly, I'm thinking that there may be a lot of parents listening to this right now. I know there are a lot of parents I've talked to who, when we enter into this discussion, they're like, well, I haven't done any of that. We haven't had those conversations, which is a particular challenge, I think.
But there is hope, Jacob. I know that there's a movement of a body of knowledge that is growing in terms of how to talk to children about sex, especially with the new understanding of sexual identity. And so what I have read and what I've heard is coming to understand that holistically we are sexual beings, right? That is part of being an embodied person, right? We have hormones, that is fully entwined in who we
right.
are as people and human beings. And so how do we approach this with children in a way they understand? And I think it starts with that differentiation that needs to be diluted, or grown out of that differentiation between sexes on the one side, and that's for when we're adults. Of course, sex is for adults, but just the idea of being an embodied person,
right,
and understanding our own bodies and another person's body. And so Julie Slattery is a good author that talks very specifically about this understanding. And the other hope is that there are like Instagram accounts, one, for example, Birds and Bees, that talk about how do we normalize this conversation?
Right.
And I think that's where the hope is, that before, parents had no resources. They had their book clubs, or they had their best friend who they can bounce these things off of. And so I think parents have that hope of resources on how can they start that conversation.
Right. Yes.
Without making it the conversation, but making it part of everyday language and just normalizing that type of talk.
Right. Yes, I can imagine parents listening. They may be thinking right now, yeah, so I wouldn't, if I had known and if I could have planned, I would never want my first direct conversation about sex to also be when I'm going to try to explain what's happening between your father and I, or your mother and I. But a lot of them are there. And I'm thinking about, okay, if you're in that situation, what are some pointers? And one thing that comes to my mind is that go ahead and try to build that scaffold, right? So don't just jump in and say, well, your father's a sex addict and he's, cheated on me. And, but, can we present it in a way that sex isn't the bad guy, that sexuality isn't the bad guy, and maybe that there isn't a bad guy. I mean, that's tough, which is one reason why I often counsel parents. This shouldn't be a disclosure. Disclosure to children shouldn't be a disclosure that's made right after you've learned yourself. Let's do some processing on your own first, right? Yeah.
And also to add to that point, Jake, that thing about verbally saying to a child, oh, your dad or your mom is a sex addict, the being aware that the way you talk about the acting out partner also matters.
Yes.
So saying things like, dad is unreliable and he's not going to be there for you anymore, or small things like that is also really important. And so that's not directly about sex in particular, but it's outing the dad in a way by defaming the character,
right?
By bringing down the character of who he or she might be.
Right. Because what happens there inadvertently, I believe, I mean, I don't know that a parent would do this on purpose, but I have worked with family systems who are dealing with this. I've worked with the adult children of those who have been put through this when they were younger. And what can end up happening is that the children become what clinically we might call a mismanaged third, right? So if I put the child between my partner and me, right? I put them between, I expose them to that which should be dealt with within our dyad, within our coupleship. I have now just made that child what's called a mismanaged third. And that's more than a child is developmentally ready to take on, right? Yeah.
Definitely. And also how you touched on the adult children. I mean, that is a completely different pathology of understanding a parent's addiction.
Right.
And there's also a distinction to be made between children who grow up knowing something is up, but they don't know what it is, and never knowing and continuing to build that internal state. Or you have those children who grow up into adult children of sex addicts and know. And so it's very person specific, depending on the situation. Did they find out as children and grow up with that narrative? Did they always know something was up but didn't know what it was and created the internalized story? Or do they find out when they're adults and then have to work, like in hindsight, have to do a backward meaning-making process of, oh, that's why mom and dad were never around, because they were in counseling, or that's why mom was always so upset, that's why I always saw her crying, or maybe always being hypervigilant, that's why I saw dad being cold or over apologetic. Or so it's a backward meaning making for adult children.
Right.
For sure.
So let's kind of parse this out, maybe these different scenarios that you just laid out, and let's start with younger children. Okay. And I'm thinking, from toddler age up through maybe 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there. Because we haven't even brought up the dimension of age yet. And so there's a developmental appropriateness to what's shared, right? So how might we approach, say, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old? Because like you said, they're so perceptive If you think your 5-year-old doesn't know the emotional atmosphere of the house, you're really missing the reality of what's going on, right? They're little barometers for the emotional atmosphere. Yeah.
I feel like I need to answer this question with a lot of compassion and grace, because essentially what we as counselors, or perhaps myself, would be asking from parents, particularly the betrayed partner, is a lot.
Oh, yes.
Because what would be required is that mom and dad work together for the sake of the children. And oh my gosh, Jake, I have no judgment for moms who are betrayed partners and cannot work on a team that there's been such deep injustice. So I'm very aware of that. But honestly, it is the ideal poster child, no pun intended, way of dealing with children that young, is that if they were born in a home where mom and dad were together, that is what they know. And so that's what I love about your model, Jake, the couple-centered recovery, because it keeps the couple together. And that's where the indirect message comes for the child. Together we are always stronger.
Yes.
But it's so idealistic. It's because there are times when they split. And so
I hear you.
So we have to make space.
Yeah, I hear you, and I completely agree. The amount of compassion that wells up as I think through specific clients who I know were in this situation, right, and the struggle that they went through in trying to just navigate this whole process. And yet what I have seen happen, not every time, because it takes two, and sometimes someone's unwilling or unable to show up in this way. But if you're able, what I think has been so amazing is to see two people who are in a very tenuous relationship, just the two of them, but they can agree they both love their kids, right? And for the sake of their kids, somehow they're able to come together just on providing safety and stabilization as well. The APSATS model has those three phases in the multidimensional partner trauma model: safety and stability, then that grief phase, number 2, which is about mourning and meaning making, and then number 3, which is renewal and post-traumatic growth. And children are moving through those stages as well if they're in their home, right? And so how do we as a mom and a dad, yes, we've got tons going on, how can we communicate safety and stability to these children? That's what we're trying to do. And that's whether they're 5 or 15 or 25, really.
Yeah. And I think at these points, Jake, it's really important to pull on the resources that are around us. And so if we go on a professional level, there are people that specifically specialize in children advocacy in terms of counseling. And that's on a professional level. When the coupleship is struggling, then reach out to people who are supportive and trustworthy and that the children really enjoy. So, for example, if Granny and Grandpa are a good source, when mom and dad aren't able to put up that front, even though it's coming from a good heart,
right? Have
that backup. Have those people that can step in and play with the kids, and just so that they could have a break. They don't have to always carry it on their own.
Yes.
I mean, it's draining on every single level. And so when you have children that young, they are already demanding of your time. Then add this, and it doubles that, triples that. And So it doesn't have to be a lonely road.
Yes.
You know, it's okay. It's okay to find that best friend that knows, that can step in, that brings the children the joy when mom and dad aren't able to be there for an hour or two while they figure things out.
Right. Yeah. And of course the language we would use, the level of like granularity, the level of detail that we would go into, that's going to change as kids develop and get older. They're going to have different questions. They're going to be scaffolding from a different place. And yet another dynamic that came to my mind as I was listening to you there is how, and I've said this to clients as well, this is an opportunity for you, mom and dad, to begin perhaps to model a certain type of boundaries that have not previously existed within the family system. So maybe the kids have never seen mom and dad actually be a solid dyad, a solid unit, you know, that are properly managing all the thirds in their lives, kids and work and neighbors and family and all of that. Well, here's your chance to, in a really powerful way, do that. And that might look like saying to a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old, no, this is all the information we're going to give you. The rest is between the two of us, and it's really not yours. Right. Yeah. And that's I've seen it happen with some of the clients who I've worked with over the course of years. Those 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds who they set boundaries with become adults who suddenly know how to set boundaries and didn't have the burden of, you know, carrying some of the weight of what was going on between their mom and dad earlier.
Yeah. And that just made me think of how putting down boundaries in that way can also prevent some sort of triangulation.
Exactly.
Or a separate segue. So when we're talking about children who are, let's say, 10 to 14, how they can easily become mom's best friend and dad's enemy.
Mm.
And so putting down that boundary is effectively fighting for the relationship. That's an action saying, for the health of the relationship of mom and dad, I'm not going to talk to my children about how dad is absent
right.
or not there.
But it's also for the health of the child, because to take a 12-year-old, and this is going to be tough, what I'm about to say, so brace yourselves, listeners. If this is getting a little close to home, back in my preacher days, you know, my congregants would tell me, "You stepping on my toes this morning." So I might be getting close to that. So brace yourself. But to talk to a 12 or 14 or 16 or even a 17 or 18-year-old child about your struggles with your partner's sex addiction is to spousify that child, right? It's really to make that child a surrogate spouse. And, you know, they need you as a parent, not a friend still at that point. And as hard as that is, that's one reason why we say to betrayed partners, you both need and deserve good, healthy community where you can take your aches and pains and hurts and wounds, and it's people who can handle that with you. I don't care how mature you think your teenage son or daughter is, it is not developmentally appropriate for you to be taking the details of you working out your betrayal to them.
But also not just support, but accountability.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think in the stages, depending on what stage when was the discovery, what is the stage of the journey of the coupleship in this place, and when the time is right, because I think, of course, in the beginning, the betrayed partner needs validation, security,
yes,
like a containment, And so in that space of extreme pain, that's when she needs the support. But when is the time, I would ask myself, when is the time to be stable enough for accountability? When can a partner say, okay, I don't want to do this for my child, even though this is hurtful. Can I ask this person to keep me accountable so that I know I'm not doing this on the outside? Maybe the betraying partner is not the trustworthy person or the safe person to point those things out. Because, we have different roles and parts to us. And so let's just use the mom, for example. We have the mom part, and then we have the wife part within her. And when there's a betraying partner, he has the dad part, and the husband, which is now the betraying partner. So in which part is it going to land when the dad is trying to be accountable or correct that mom? Is it going to speak to her mother heart, or is it going to be speaking to her betrayed spouse part? Because if it's going to be speaking to her betrayed spouse part, is she going to receive input from the dad? I don't know. Is she ready to receive input from him? Is she ready to be held accountable by him?
Probably not.
Yeah. No, probably not. Depending on the stage, stage they're in. That's why external people are so important.
Yeah, and for good reason. She's probably not going to be ready if it's too soon, too early, if that person hasn't demonstrated consistency of change over time and, all of that. And so, thank you. That's really well said. I'm wondering also, let's see, how can I phrase this question that's formulating in my mind? So we're talking a lot about the betrayed partner, but I know we also have lots of listeners who are the ones who did the betraying. And I guess I'll just be direct. Yeah. I'll quit trying to turn it into a question. I'll just make a statement, and you can build on it if you have anything to add. And that is that when I'm working through this issue with couples, I'm always quick to look the one who did the betraying in the eye and say, you really need to take the lead on this. Don't make your wife, your husband, whoever's betrayed, don't make your partner be the one to tell your children. You do it and take ownership, again, at whatever level is appropriate. So I betrayed your mother. I have hurt her deeply. She has needed a lot of care and support. It's my fault that things in the house haven't been like they used to be, right? It's my fault.
Yeah.
We are getting help. We are, saying those sorts of things. To me, even though the older the kid, the more curious they're going to be about the details of what do you mean you betrayed mom? What is it? Right? To me, those assurances of I'm taking responsibility and ownership here, and we're taking action to get help. That is the foundation of safety and security that parents can give their kids. And I think it does come better from the one who did the betraying. You have thoughts on that, Carley?
Yeah. Oh yeah, tons. But I'll keep it straight. But yeah, I think I think, yes, we talk a lot about the partner, and at the same time, the betraying partner is also, let's say if it's a male, is also a dad, right? And you don't want to take away their voice. You want to empower them by, even though it's really hard, by giving them that job. You've got to pitch up. You've got to do this. It's very empowering. It might feel like they can be engulfed in shame, because they have to face it. what I have seen is that the response from the children, well, more so I've seen this more in adult children, but that ownership that is taken is pretty well received.
Yes.
Like with adult children, the amount of times I've heard, Dad, I am so happy that you are being real. I didn't think you were real.
Wow.
I thought you were this perfect person. Or Dad, you were absent and I thought it was my fault. I'm so glad to know. And so it is that you know, you need to give them that opportunity, even though it's also a lot to ask. It's a good ask. It's asking them to step out of their comfort zone, but I don't want to say not from a place of hurt, because I don't want to disregard the hurt in them from maybe previous trauma or so, but it's not the same ask that we ask from a partner to forgive.
Yes.
No, it comes from a different place. It's a different expectation for the system.
Yes, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. So before I want to hone in on speaking specifically about adult children of sex addicts in a minute. But before we move on there, I'm thinking for those who have younger kids, and they're listening to us and they go, okay, this sounds nice and this sounds good and everything, but you really still haven't answered the question, when should I tell my kids? So like real practical, real specific, how would you answer that question, Carley?
Jake, I can't.
I know you can't because of the variables. I know, but I think there are some principles, right, that we could lay down. So here's what I would say. Tell me what you think about this. I would say, number one, wait until you have the truth first. So get your own disclosure done. Okay. Go through a therapeutic disclosure process that will be so stabilizing for you. You will be able to approach that conversation from such a better place. When you go to your kids, you don't have to approach them with all your own sort of worst case scenarios and speculations and trying to piece it together. You know, maybe this is the reality. Maybe it's this, from that more hypervigilant place. You can come from a place of more certainty of your own reality, which is going to help you know their reality better. So, that's number one, I would say, after your own disclosure. The second thing that comes up for me is do your own initial, you don't have to finish the whole phase, but some initial grief work around the impact. So maybe that's an impact letter process and a little bit of grief work. Even better if you can do it with your partner in a couple-centered way so that y'all are coming up with a shared story of what happened that you're then going to communicate appropriately to your kids. Thoughts on that, Carley?
Well, actually, Jake, that was some of my initial thoughts, especially with finding some recovery before dragging them into the process. You know, so I think coming from a stable place is good. I did not consider the grief process, and that just puts the cherry on the top. So that's really, really good. I would say in terms of how, so if we're coming from a secure shared space where there has been some really solid attempt and good, achieved some measure of success within themselves with, okay, we're feeling like we're on the same page. I would also encourage the very mundane thing of being very structured about how to do it. Like, have the conversation with your spouse first, like revise the story. Don't just go in and be like, okay, we're going to have this conversation. Like, really revise it. Pick a time that's not like scary out of the blue. Like, don't go pick them up from school and be like, we're going to talk now, you know? The way we approach it is also really important. Like, make it comfortable and inviting, and the way we talk to our children is also being ready to answer some questions. Right. Being ready to comfort our children if they cry. Not being completely surprised if they're like, oh, we don't care, and they run off, like, because they don't get it. So just being prepared within yourself for any emotional response from the child, because it's completely unpredictable.
Right.
We don't know what the internalized story is. We don't know how they're going to respond to big news like that. So I think being very structured and emotionally prepared for that conversation is also really important.
Yeah, two things I just heard you say that I want to highlight as well, because I think they're so good, Carley. One, about the structure, about being prepared. With my clients who've walked through this, I actually have them write out a disclosure to the children. Work on that first together, decide together on what the appropriate level of detail is, who's going to read it. Are both people going to say something, or is only one person going to read it? Are they both going to be present? Which I think is usually best, but not always, right? Because there are different situations. So, and then I have them actually come in and we do a whole visualization exercise around reading it to the kids. So that's huge. And then the second thing that I so appreciate you saying, because I wasn't remembering to say this piece of advice, and that's around making space for questions. Absolutely inviting those kids to ask questions, but not just in the moment, to let them know there's an open door, because that's a lot to drop on a kid, perhaps, right? Especially if it's out of nowhere, and they might be processing it internally for some time. And here's what I would say. And so this is especially to any parents who are more avoidant in their attachment style. Just because your child, you invite your child to ask you questions later, if they don't, you follow up. Don't think, oh, then they're fine. Wait a week and then say, hey, buddy, wanted to circle back to you about that conversation we had last week about what mom and I are going through. I just want you to know, again, if you have any questions, that I really mean it when I say you can ask. Because doing that, now your actions are backing up your words, right? Which that's crucial for betrayed partners to see that happen, where words and actions are congruent. It's going to be important for the kids too, because there's trust that's going to have to be rebuilt there as well.
Yeah. And also, I would also say, don't be surprised if the questions continue or change at different stages of the child's life.
Yes.
Because that's
right.
A part of the family narrative. That is something that happened that changed the dynamic of the family, which internally changed the structure of the child. And so when they're adult, when they grow up and perhaps they get married, maybe those fears come up, maybe those questions come up. Oh, I remember this happened when I was a child, So don't be surprised if the questions continue.
Yes.
At different stages of life.
That's a great reminder. Thank you. So let's shift. We don't have like a ton of time, so maybe this should even be its own episode, but at least briefly, let's talk about adult children of sex addicts. And I don't know, what are just some general kind of headline principles, truths out there about this population that you think our listeners might need to know?
I think for most adult children, what I've gathered is that they knew something.
Right.
They might not know the specifics, but they knew.
Right.
They all could tell, okay, something happened during that time. When Johnny was 12 years old, mom and dad, something was going up. And then everything went back to normal. And that in itself is very confusing. Something's not normal, then everything feels normal, but it's not the same as it used to be. Very confusing. And I think it also depends if children found out, and depending on what they found out, I think it affects their understanding of sex, their understanding of what is healthy and what is not. Some may have like a deep fear. Maybe they're going to become like dad, or maybe they'll be mom. Maybe they're going to be a betrayed partner one day. because that's the way life is. I know for my own story, that was my biggest fear. Oh, my husband's going to cheat on me. That's what men do. They cheat. And so there are these schemas, these ways of understanding the world that we might think is very subtle and just one side of the story, when actually it has a very tricky way of weaving itself into the child's identity of who they are.
Wow.
I think in a nutshell, that is what we could say about adult children.
Thank you. That's really good. And I do think, there's so much to go there. We'll just have to have you back and do another whole episode on adult children. Yeah. Well, Carley, can you just, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here. Can you just give some words of hope and encouragement to any parents out there who are listening and maybe they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is a daunting task. How could I can't even imagine getting through this. What would you say to that mom or that dad?
I think the hope is that if you're listening to this, you're not listening to this on your own. There are thousands of other people listening to this and searching for this, because there are thousands of other parents that are going through this exact same thing.
Wow.
And so knowing that you're not alone is a big deal, because there are people who have done this and people who have wished that they've done it in a different way. I mean, life has a way of presenting opportunities to rectify that what we've done wrong. And so for those who have adult children who have gone through this, there is hope, because you can make it up now. It's not too late. If you are a parent of a young child, it starts with that just basic scaffolding, and then presenting to the child that mom and dad, we love you and we're going to be there for you. United. Maybe there's a separation, but always united for the sake of the children. And so even when we don't get the little details right in how we say it or what we say, when our actions speak louder than words, right? It's so cliche, but it's so true that when our children see us pitching up and just being there, that's what makes the difference.
Yes.
I think
that's so well said. And I just want to say to anyone who's listening, and maybe you're going, you're assuming that my husband, my wife, the one who did the betraying, you're assuming that they're playing along. And we know that that's not always the case, that there are a lot of parents out there who they're having to navigate this solo because the one who did the betraying has left them, abandoned them, is not cooperating. And I would echo what Carley just said. You also are not alone. Maybe the one who you would most hope to be your partner through this is not showing up, but there are a lot of people who can and will. And I just want to point people to the APSATS directory at APSATS.org, APSATS.org, and find a clinician, find a coach who can help you walk through this, who's been trained specifically in dealing with betrayal trauma to help you get stability so you can offer that to your kids, which I know you so desperately want to do. Well, Carley, thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure. I appreciate you and all that you do. You've been listening to Betrayal Recovery Radio, the official podcast of APSATS. If you've received help or hope from this episode, I encourage you to share it with someone you know. If you've not yet done so, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite listening platform. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Jake Porter, and you can always email me directly at jake@apsats.org. I'd love to hear your ideas, questions, or comments about the show. Until next time, keep choosing to use your voice and live your values. It's good for you and for this world.